Good morning. My name is Tom Goldtooth. I'm Executive Director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, and I'm very proud to have our members of a US-based Climate Justice Alliance that was formed to really challenge our energy policy, climate policies, not only in the United States, but also to have a voice of frontline communities, Indigenous, Black, and people of color from the United States and take part in these UNFCCC COP meetings. So we're very concerned with what we've seen as outcome narrative, like specifically the Article 6 negotiations and the global stocktake. We've been participating in those, taking our notes. We don't know what the final wording will be, but we know it's been very intense and crazy. So at this time, with our North American frontline groups, that also includes our sister alliance from Canada, Indigenous Climate Action. We are here and to report on our articulation of the lack of progress at this COP. Our first speaker I'd like to introduce is Cheryl. Cheryl is a member of our Climate Justice Alliance. She is with the Chisholm Legacy Project. It's a Climate Justice Alliance member, and she based in Atlanta, but she's also, her roots come from Guyana, West Africa. So I'm proud to introduce her as our first speaker. Cheryl.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to be here. As he said, my name is Cheryl Kwapong, she, her pronouns. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, with roots in Ghana, West Africa. Ladies and gentlemen and esteemed colleagues and members of the press, I'm honored to be before you today on behalf of the Chisholm Legacy Project. We are an organization that stands at the intersection of racial justice, gender justice, Black femme wellness, and we are rooted in a just transition. We serve as a vehicle for Black communities on the front lines of climate justice with resources to traverse the path from vision to strategy to action plan and implementation, as well as transformation. One of the projects that was birthed from our organization and authored by our fabulous executive director, Jackie Patterson, was something that we graciously refer to as the 1545 paper. And it details an inventory of the 15 ways that Black people are the most disproportionately affected by climate change, but also the 45 ways which they are leading in solutions. As we come to the close of COP28 and consider the very communities that we were sent here to represent, I can't help but notice two stark realities for all of our conference's participants. One, a web of business meetings run by people who only wish to maximize profit and continue down the trajectory of extraction till there is absolutely nothing left, not caring who they trample in the process. The other, a community weaved together of the most vulnerable and yet the strongest, yelling out into the wind, demanding their dignity and honor, fighting for the right to remain on their land, in their homes, to drink their water, and to heal their own communities, representing their people and bringing their ancestors with them wherever they go. I highlight this because sometimes the frontline communities are portrayed as helpless by people around them, when in reality, in the face of unprecedented global challenges, it has become increasingly evident that the solutions that we seek must be rooted in the experience and wisdom of those who are directly affected. Our insights are invaluable, and we must be attentive to the expertise that emanates from the lived experience of these communities. The frontline communities exist in every part of the globe. Another thing that we do is the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative, a mouthful, but we connect environmental justice activists across the diaspora, so on the continent of Africa, South America, Latin America, the US, Europe, etc. And we also talk to them about the solutions, about the ways that they're disproportionately affected and the solutions that they have. Why is this important? Because when we as the Global South, our most impacted communities across the world, are at the helm, we should be at the helm of all the conversations that will influence where and how we live. The ones, let me be very clear, the ones who created this climate crisis will not be the ones to solve it. And I reject the idea and the notion that we as the global majority, but also the most adversely affected by climate change, have to negotiate the rights of our people, land, and water with our oppressors. In a time where we see recolonization of indigenous people across the globe, supported by Western nations and fueling a genocide in real time and in real life before our very eyes, it is more imperative than ever that we listen to the people, we cross-collaborate, and we strategize to build our collective power, because their time is up, and they know it, and we know it. So let us remember that frontlines are not just geographical locations, but they are spaces where communities are resisting, adapting, and innovating in the face of adversity. We are hoping to work together to amplify our voices, co-create a sustainable and just future for all. Together, we stand united in our commitment to taking back our power and to creating a brave new world where real people are at the center of our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. As what is reflected in her presentation and is a foundation of our mission and our mandates from Indigenous, Black, and people of color, from the belly of the beast of North America, is building people power. And that's what we've been doing, and aligning with people throughout the world from the Global South. The next speaker is Eriel Tchekwie Deranger, and she's with the Indigenous Climate Action, a co-founder and the executive director. She is Dene from northern so-called Alberta, Canada, from the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation. Some of you may have heard of the oil sands, the tar sands, the bitumen that's taken from Mother Earth, processed in very toxic pipeline transportation routes all over North America, even going into tankers. So she's here to speak, and Eriel.
Masicho, thank you, Tom. Iklanete, Dënesųłiné, Eriel Tchekwie Deranger Betsini Hasli. As Tom stated, my name is Eriel Deranger, or Eriel Tchekwie Deranger. My name, Eriel Tchekwie, is Dene. I'm always proud to state that I don't have a colonial name, I only have a Dene name, and my name means Thunder Woman in my language. I have been participating in COP since 2009, and actually Tom invited me to my first COP in Copenhagen, where leaders came together to try to write the Copenhagen Accord, but they failed. And they failed to do so because of the pushback from civil society and indigenous peoples from across the globe that demanded that we not have a global climate agreement that focused solely on the economy and calculating carbon in spreadsheets and really being devoid of a human and indigenous rights approach. And now in 2023, what we are seeing is that we're seeing the continued push by colonial states to try to reduce human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples back into an economic framework, and a framework that allows them to simply calculate GHGs. While the world has been applauding all of the commitments to the loss and damage and climate finance mechanisms, we still see real problems with the mechanisms that have been created within the structures here at the UNFCCC. There still lacks real processes and mechanisms that will ensure that indigenous peoples and frontline land defenders and frontline communities received direct access to this fund. As it stands now, we are talking about big G7 states, global north, giving money to developing nation states. And while this is good, and we absolutely must see this, there must be assurances that those that have directly experienced the loss and damages from the climate crisis, those that have not contributed to the climate crisis or have contributed the least, receive those direct benefits. Without assurances and mechanisms that this happens, this is a failure. Within the negotiations for the last 2 weeks, I feel like I've been here for 2 years, what we've seen, rather than having these assurances, is that Indigenous rights have been degraded. They've been conflated with local communities. We have seen that we're not having a position within the board to determine how these mechanisms will be managed within the World Bank and other leading institutions. And instead, we are simply being given the opportunity as passive observers to try to hold them accountable. This is shameful. This is a violation of what we have fought so hard for the last 28 COPs. We cannot accept these degradations to what we have been fighting for and the continuation of no language that talks about prevention of emissions. We have nothing that allows us to talk about stopping the loss and damages to our lands and territories, stopping the loss and damages to our ecosystems, stopping the violence on our people. Instead, they are creating loopholes that companies can simply pay for what they've done. States can simply pay for what they've done. This is just another polluter pay mechanism. If there are no avenues that assure that there are mechanisms for grievances to stop the loss and damage. In addition, what we really need to be seeing is a phase out of fossil fuels. More than anything, we need to be talking about stopping the harms to the communities. As someone who comes from a community, as Tom stated, downstream from one of the largest industrial projects on planet Earth, my community doesn't even have access to this fund. As a community from the global north and from a developing nation, my community will never see a cent from the Loss and Damage Fund, and yet we have seen incredible loss and damages. The caribou in our region have declined almost 90%, a keystone species that our community relied on. We have seen the disappearance of fish, migratory birds. We've seen the extinction of animals, and many, many, many more. Every year, dozens being put on the endangered list. We live adjacent to a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is now in crisis because of the development. And yet, we will never see a cent of this. We cannot be talking about pitting the global north against the global south. There must be responsibilities of all nations to pay for the loss and damages to people on the front line, not simply allowing colonial states to continue to have colonial rule and allow them to continue to degrade our lands and territories forever. Colonization is not something that happened. Colonization is still actively happening. I live in a colonial occupied state known as so-called Canada, and I have seen what they have continued to do to erode our rights and simply parade us around as wards of their state. We need to be pushing forward for the sovereignty and self-determination, and that comes from mechanisms within the UN bodies that see us as sovereign states, not as simply passive observers. We must demand true upholding of human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples across all mechanisms. Otherwise, this will continue to be a flop. Thank you, Masi Cho.
Thank you, Eriel. And very important, because one of our platforms that we have been bringing to the COP meetings for years has been a rights-based approach, but also waking up people of the world, that Indigenous peoples who come from nation states, from countries where they have inherent rights as well, not individual rights, but inherent and collective rights is very important. So thank you very much. I was taking notes as I was walking over here, scrambling from another meeting. But I must say, you know, I've been taking part in these COP meetings since COP4. Anyone here that was early participating in the COP4 in Argentina, raise your hand. I'm just curious. So I was there, and there were only 8 indigenous peoples representing indigenous territories and lands throughout the world. Things have progressed. We have a strong indigenous caucus now, and it's been a long road. I want to say that the UNFCCC, the way I see it right now, with the language I see coming out of negotiation, the UNFCCC is a cop-out. It is not about phase-out. Traditional indigenous knowledge tell us Mother Earth and Father Sky cannot absorb any more carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. This is very concerning to a lot of the indigenous peoples, the elders, shamans, spiritual people, women leaders throughout the world that I've been lucky to talk to. Economies are run from the boardrooms of the fossil fuel industries, and as such, there are trillions of dollars at stake here at COP28. We see how the industries, the governments, with banks and investors manipulating any real action on climate change that undermine justice, undermine the inherent rights of indigenous peoples and the human rights of local communities and fence line communities throughout the world. As more pressure is put on the fossil fuel industries to phase out fossil fuels at source, the more pressure they put on false solutions so that they can continue to extract. That's a big term that we are concerned about, is extraction. Mineral extraction, a extractive industry, but also climate finance is based upon extraction. So our concern is that we see false solutions in the global stocktake as carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, nuclear, and nature-based solutions. And we also see it in the scheming processes of Article 6 negotiations with language that are an affront to climate justice and Mother Earth. We have our government here, very active, where I come from, that has been saying they are not comfortable with the intervention of Bolivia wanting the word Mother Earth in there because our country says there's no definition. I don't understand what you mean by Mother Earth. So these are things that we are witnessing here at this. So we say no to Article 6, no to carbon markets, no to removals, no to nature-based solutions. The climate crisis demands a rapid transition for a binding global phase-out of fossil fuels and all extraction and production at source. Thank you. So we have some time here, and if you have any questions of any of the speakers, please state who you are, who you represent, media, and be very clear on your question if you want to direct it to one of the speakers here. I appreciate no statements, but questions. Thank you very much. We have a microphone here available. We have one hand here. Right to your right.
Thank you. My question is to any of the panelists. My name is Daisy Francor. I'm an Indigenous woman from the United States, from the Navajo Nation, and my question is, what have some of the inequities that you've come across in climate finance here at COP28? You mentioned it, Eriel, so just wanting to hear your reflections about climate finance inequities. Thank you.
I think when we talk about climate finance, some of the really sort of stark contrasts and inequities is countries in the global north are making some pretty small commitments considering the amount of impacts they've had. So, you know, we saw Canada and the United States give less than $20 million each, and this is in comparison to the immense amount of emissions that these two countries create. And so when we talk about the inequities that we're seeing, countries aren't actually putting their dollars where the damages have come from, and there's an inequity to who actually accesses those funds and what those funds are going to be accessed for. And this is a real challenge because Tom mentioned false solutions. When we talk about false solutions in loss and damage, how is those climate finance mechanisms going to support the greenwashing of countries to push forward potential projects that aren't actually going to substantively improve the lives of communities down there? How are we going to ensure that we're moving towards an equitable future? In addition, some of the other challenges we've seen within the conversations around adaptation and just transition, which are directly related to climate finance, is within those conversations, we are still lacking definitions, clear definitions on those strategies. And the people that are driving those tables and making those decisions are not those that are going to directly benefit from those mechanisms and projects and definitions. It is states, colonial states that have caused the harm, and it's corporations and oil and gas lobbyists that are sitting at those tables and trying to define what is just transition, what is the strategies to move forward. And again, Indigenous peoples that have inherent and internationally recognized rights are simply relegated to observer statuses over and over and over again. And I want to draw one really important thing when it comes to the Indigenous rights frameworks is right now what we've seen across all negotiations is this degradation to Indigenous rights by conflating them with local communities. I do not want to degrade the importance of the voices of local communities, but as Indigenous peoples, we have fought for decades to have internationally affirmed rights, and we are seeing governments now use language like local knowledges instead of traditional Indigenous knowledge systems or Indigenous knowledge systems. And we don't have a definition of what local communities are. We don't have a definition of local knowledges. And this really puts and compromises Indigenous peoples and further expands that inequity to being able to inform how we move forward to prevent further degradation, not only to our rights, but to our lands and territories, and who ultimately will have access to these funds. So there's still a lot of work to be done. It's not over. COP29 and COP30 are going to be very interesting years to see exactly how these mechanisms will actually unfold, how the World Bank will hold this, considering their track record of inequities to Indigenous peoples in the past.
Thank you. Cheryl?
So we know and understand that climate finance is different than funding. And a lot of times the frontline communities themselves, the ones that we are up here representing, don't ever see the money directly, despite being the most affected negatively by climate change and the climate crisis. We know that we're calling for climate reparations, right? So like, what does that look like at these levels? And then we know, again, like Indigenous peoples and Black peoples, they're dying as a result of climate change. They're dying as a result of, they can't feed their families, they can't drink the water that's around them, they can't plant on their land. And so we see the inequities, like my sister here was talking about how like a country like the United States, who has a military that is the biggest polluter in the world, like I'm from the US, we are contributing to carbon emissions and to just the death of people as a result of what we're putting out. $17 million is shameful. That's shame on us. If no one else is saying it, shame on us. So I don't know, we need to have these kinds of conversations, and we also need to, this is just like a little, tidbit as well, like as we're sitting around here and we know that there are all of these officials and people who we're having these conversations with, they shouldn't be able to walk around comfortably. We need to be in their faces. We need to be asking them, how can you claim to want the votes of our people, claim to represent our people, and this is what you're doing? It's a slap in the face, and it's showing exactly how they feel about us as the Global South and as vulnerable communities. I added a little extra in there, but
Thank you, thank you. I like the word shameful. I mean, it's really difficult for those of us that come from North America because we have governments that are bullies in these settings on developing countries, pushing an economic globalization agenda that's nothing but climate capitalism at the expense of frontline communities, local communities, indigenous peoples, women, and it does involve militarization. It does involve colonization and takings of land. It is a land grab on a massive scale. The money that can be, money can be important definitely to our communities, many communities that I've met, but there are some important questions such as, is this a financial mechanism or a direct fund? Do the donor countries or philanthropists expect a return on the money? And how is the private sector involved? These are important questions that we are asking. We have Indigenous Environmental Network has a report on our webpage on climate finance that we developed last year for COP27. So it does involve, climate finance mechanisms that allow countries to invest in a multitude of financial systems to build upon carbon offsets and markets in developing countries. And as we are seeing climate finance fail to reach indigenous peoples and local communities, and so many countries are turning to carbon markets and offsets to try to generate income. We need to really look at that and the connection. 20 years of carbon markets continue to fail. There's so many reports coming out that it does not reduce emissions at source. And they fail to reduce pollution, and perhaps most important, in terms of climate change, the carbon markets allow fossil fuel industries to continue to pollute, to greenwash, to extract, to keep fossil fuels from coming out of the ground. That's why we witness here a cop-out of this COP28, not about phase out. They're even trying to entertain watered down language saying they're going to reduce fossil fuels or phase down. That's why we are here as local communities, as Black people of color, from the belly of the beast, and also standing as indigenous peoples for our collective inherent rights. So I think that takes me up to 2 minutes left, and we got to follow the schedule here. There's another group coming, so I appreciate your patience and your time listening to our press conference here. Thank you very much.
A photo.
Just right here.
Okay. And right here after you guys. We can look at you first and then we can look at. Oh, over here.
Okay, and then
Thank you. Oh, okay. Oh, hold up the fist, right? Okay. Wait, they said hold it.
One more.
Guys, one more.
One more.
Look at my aunties right here. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Okay.